Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
He's okay. We just can't find him. They're the words said in an effort to keep you from panicking. He's okay. We just can't find him. The words that become your beacon of hope as the day turns long and you wait for your child to be found. He's okay. We just can't find him. The words that become your soundboard for your anger. He's okay. We just can't find him. The words that transition into the start of your grief. He's okay. We just can't find him. These are the words that catapult you into a world that crumbles. A life left waiting for what really happened to Jaryd Atadero. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello, I am your host, Kayla. Welcome back to our regularly scheduled programming, which means that you're only getting one episode a week now, which, for how much I have going on between work and this podcast and being a parent and moving, and you get the picture. I would love to be able to do 2 episodes a week. I just don't have that capacity as of yet. But very quickly, kind of going in along those directions, you may or may not see, depending on where you are a subscriber, that I have been changing a few things for what each subscription option has. So Apple and Spotify subscriptions, as far as I know, they only allow you to have one subscription for your podcast, or like one level or one tier. If you hop on over to Patreon, they allow you to kind of have multiple tiers. So I currently have created a $1.99 tier, a $4.99 tier, and then a $6.99 tier. And what those are doing is the $1.99 is just kind of your basic level. Thank you for doing what you do. This is a small way to contribute financially, so that way you can continue to do these things and create these amazing episodes. The $4.99 tier gets you a brand new subscriber-only episode. It's the very first episode that gets released every month. And then the $6.99 tier is going to, starting in 2026, have an additional episode every quarter. And because I do all of this stuff on my own, I'm trying to make sure that I can do things sustainably. And so that way, I don't end up getting burnt out. And so I'm starting with, you'll get 4 extra episodes at that $6.99 tier, and then build from there. As a reminder, every single dollar that this podcast makes is donated at the end of the year, and in exchange, you get access to every single episode of the subscriber-only episodes, and the first Wednesday of every month, you get a new episode. So I think that's a fair trade. I think that's actually a pretty good trade. If you consider all of the work that goes into these episodes, that's an extremely fair trade. There are some free ways that you can support me and the show, and that is by leaving a 5-star review anywhere that you listen. Follow on Facebook. You can follow on Instagram. Subscribe over on YouTube. Maybe someday I will be able to do video episodes over there. That's kind of a light 2026 goal, is to be able to do 1 video episode a month, but I got to figure out timing for that, because that's a lot more editing than I'm used to. And then the last way that you can support this show for free is to just take your favorite episode and share it with a friend, or share it on social media. Your support is, again, what allows me to continue to create, and I could not do this without you. So there's always, with every single episode, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. Even if you are just listening and doing nothing extra, that listen matters, and I appreciate you for being here. The second thing that I very quickly want to go over is that I had somebody send me a message about hunting, which if you listen to the episode about Greg Matthews, you heard me say over and over again that I am not a hunter. And so I had a wonderfully kind person reach out, and they said some things that I'm going to share here with you. They did give me permission to share this information, and I'm just going to read the message verbatim because I think they covered it better than what I can do in a condensed version. She says, "Hey, listening to your episode from this week, I'm a hunter and I wanted to give some insight on the call. So specifically the moose call. I'm assuming they have a cow tag, which means cows or female moose will not come to breeding calls like bull moose. This means that this is the only call option they have. They also have a bear tag, so they are actually hitting two birds with one stone with this call, as many predators are similar. Predators are extremely hard to hunt, so calls are a good tool. I do think that the call did play a role, which hopefully they thought about, but grizzlies also use gunshots as a dinner bell. They are very smart animals." And she goes on to say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I'm so glad that she did because, again, it just covers some information that I didn't have with my background as not being a hunter. And I hope that gives you some insight as well. Moving into this episode, there are a number of people who go missing in national parks and forests and even state parks and forests throughout the world each year. Unfortunately, that number is astoundingly high, and there are many circumstances that leave those behind wondering what happened because the disappearance is so seamless that it's like the person wasn't there at all. Mother Nature has a way of engulfing life. She breathes it into us and can just as easily take it away. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It could happen when you are old and ready or when you are fighting for your life. A criminal is just as likely to go missing as a child is, like on the fateful day of October the 2nd, 1999. At the time, Allyn and Allyn Atadero owned a resort called the Poudre River Resort, and they were busy making changes and improvements and working on renovations, and they were actually hosting a special event or a retreat for a Christian singles organization where single people could come in and participate in group activities and do some work to help set up the resort for winter in exchange for free lodging. One of Allyn's friends, Janet, was staying at the resort, and she offered to help watch Allyn's two young kids, 6-year-old Josie and 3-year-old Jaryd, while Allyn was working. Around 9 a.m., a large group of 11 adults wanted to go to a fishery that was only 1.5 miles away from the resort. And when Josie and Jaryd caught wind of this, they asked Janet if they could go. Janet, of course, told them that they needed to ask their dad. Allyn was exhausted from the day before. Not only had he been extremely busy with the resort, but he also stayed up late watching Godzilla with Jaryd and Josie the night before. Any parent can relate when I say that late nights with young children is not for the weak. They are just balls of energy, and when both ran up to their father, looking up at him with big brown eyes and heads of thick, dark hair, and they were just begging to go with this group. Allyn, at first, was a little hesitant. He didn't want to tell them no, but he also wasn't sure he wanted to say yes. At first, he tells Josie that she can go, but Jaryd can't, because he is 3 years old. He's just too young. But after some convincing and talking to Janet, he agrees that they can both go. So there's 11 adults with these 2 children. Everyone who is going is getting packed into cars, and he sees Jaryd climb into his seat and buckle in. Allyn walks over to the car, and he knocks on the window and points down as if to say, "Roll down the window." When Jaryd does, Allyn leans into the car and gives Jaryd a kiss. He tells Jaryd how much he loves him and to be careful, and he takes a good long look at him. Jaryd is dressed in vibrant blue sweatpants, a fleece sweater jacket, and white tennis shoes. Just before the car drives away, Jaryd says, "I love you too, Daddy." And this is the moment that would be etched into Allyn's very being for the rest of his life. Allyn, while his kids are gone, is working on renovations, which is a very physical task. Several hours later, at about 2 p.m., Allyn finally decides to sit down and take a break. He goes into his apartment, which is attached to the store of the resort, and he sits down. He doesn't realize it at first, but he falls asleep, and Allyn wakes up to this commotion going on inside of the store. He assumes that Butch, who is the store manager, has a handle on it, but before he can really do anything, two women come walking into his apartment. One of the women is clearly very nervous. She's wringing her hands and won't make eye contact with Allyn. And finally, she says to Allyn that they have a little problem with Jaryd and he needs to sit down. This is not anything that a parent wants to hear. I would not be sitting down if someone told me that there was a problem with my son, and neither does Allyn. Allyn starts peppering off questions. What happened? Did he fall? Did he hurt his ankle? What happened? And they just keep saying no. And then finally, they say, and I quote, "He's okay. We just can't find him." They elaborate saying that there were a lot of people looking for him. Allyn, of course, is pretty much like, get out of my way. That's my kid. I need to go find him. And he's kind of saying that he will meet them at the fishery. And that's when they tell him that they weren't there anymore, that they went for a hike. And here is the next thing that instinctually makes me, as a parent, mad. Do not take children someplace that their parent doesn't know about and hasn't given permission for. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's move on. So upon deciding to go on this hike, they settled on the Big South Trail. And there isn't really a clear explanation as to why they decided to go hiking with two young children in tow or what the options were. All that was stated was that they wanted something harder, and so they picked out the Big South. Allyn immediately gets into his vehicle and starts driving the 15 miles it takes to get there. The road is winding and mountainous, and the entire time, Allyn is just frantic. As he is driving, he is speeding around curves and blowing through sections that should be taken slowly. He is yelling and thumping his hand against his chest. He keeps repeating, "They lost my baby. They lost my boy." There's so much energy in this that it makes my heart hurt, especially knowing what comes next. But as many parents do, we want to believe in the best. Allyn says that he believed that search and rescue wasn't needed because he would be able to get there and he would just yell for Jaryd and Jaryd would step out of the brush and all would be okay. When Allyn arrives at the trail, it's one of those coming in hot moments where people kind of clear out of his way. There were a few members of the 11 adult hiking group that were there, and one leads Allyn up the trail. And as they do, Allyn can't help but notice and think to himself, you brought a 3-year-old on this? The trail, in his words, was crazy. The Big South Trail is an out and back style trail, and with it being very early October, the leaves on the trees are just starting to change. The yellows and reds are vibrant against the green pines, and the air is crisp and cool, giving you the perfect setting to walk into a chilling story. The beauty, at least for a parent with a missing child, doesn't even start. The trail itself has a 1,700-foot elevation gain across its 13 miles, and it actually will eventually join into a separate trail that will take you into Rocky Mountain National Park. But this group had not been intending to go that far on this day. Further, it has sections where the trail is 24 inches wide or 2 feet, which is pretty narrow, and has drop-offs on one side. There are switchbacks and moments where you can be just a few feet from the person ahead of you and not see them at all. It runs right next to drop-offs that go into the Puda River, and generally it is a difficult trail for an adult to hike, let alone a last-second decision to bring babies along as well. The trail leads you into the Poudre Canyon that is inside of Roosevelt National Forest, and in case you have not figured this out yet, the forest borders the national park on the northern and eastern sides. Together, these protected lands cover 1.27 million acres and also include the Arapaho National Forest and the Pawnee National Grasslands. It doesn't really matter where you go here, the hiking and climbing and mountaineering is rugged and difficult. The terrain itself is just very rocky, hence the name Rocky Mountain. This area is home to 16 peaks that are over 13,000 feet in elevation, And with this very domineering terrain and peaks condensed together, this area gets some really intense and unexpected weather events that play out. This is due to the range sitting right where the warm, moist air swoops up from Mexico, as well as the cooler air presses down from Canada. It just leads to some really big weather events that don't really play into the story as much. Nonetheless, Big South Trail is difficult to say the least. When interviews were being done to learn the area and search the trail, there were many adults who were shocked to learn that a 3-year-old was even taken on the trail at all. As Allyn goes farther without seeing Jaryd, he becomes more frantic. And as he becomes more frantic, the more the fear and the what-ifs creep into his mind. It is during the first week of Jaryd being missing that the details of what happened on the trail came out. The last time that Jaryd was seen alive was actually by a fisherman, 2 in fact, who were stopped and questioned by the sheriff officers as they were coming off the trail. While they were fishing, they saw Jaryd come out of the trail. He approached the river and he was using a stick to hit rocks and hitting the water. He was yelling across the stream to them and asking if there were any bears here. His big brown eyes looked at them from across the river, and they just looked back at him and told him to go away. He was scaring the fish. They watched as he turned around and ran back into the trees.
Hello. I'm Courtney, and this is The Book of the Dead, a true crime podcast based out of New Jersey. For those looking for a podcast that focuses on the victims and who they were, or cases where the family is directly involved in the telling of their loved ones' stories, each chapter of this podcast is dedicated to the victim they feature. Here, you can find cases you may have never heard of, or interviews with experts that have dedicated their lives to protect and serve, and occasionally hear from the victim themselves. So get comfortable, grab a drink, and settle in for another chapter of the Book of the Dead.
When the group started their hike, they were all together, but it didn't take long for some of the adults to want to lose the slowness of the children. So they split up into 2 groups. As the first group was able to eat up the ground ahead of them, no longer slowed down, Jaryd was kind of like, no, I'm with you guys. But he would keep returning to the second group where Janet and Josie were. When Jaryd once again caught up with the first group, he had a surge of energy and confidence, and instead of stopping and returning to the second group, he passes the adults and runs ahead. One of the women watched as he turned a corner and disappeared ahead of them, and she even thought to herself that someone needs to keep an eye on him, but that person wasn't going to be her. While they hiked, they heard a scream. Some of the adults thought it was a playful scream, and others thought that it sounded like someone who was afraid, but no one did anything at this time. No one had eyes on Jaryd, so it's impossible to confirm if the scream came from him, which is mind-boggling to me because he was 3 years old. Why are you losing sight of a 3-year-old? It wasn't long after this that at about 12:15 p.m., the 2 groups reconvened, and this was when they all realized that Jaryd was not with any of them. For about an hour, they searched for Jaryd before finally sending a group off the trail to head back to the resort to let Allyn know that Jaryd was missing, which is not a job I would want to have. This is when they tell Allyn about Jaryd, and Allyn is making his way down the trail. And then it hits him. What about his daughter? At this point, he decides to turn around, and right about the same time, his friend Butch calls him. Butch, who again was the shop manager, called search and rescue at the same time that Allyn ran out the door, and he was at the trailhead with the deputy from the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. By this point, it is 4 p.m. As Allyn starts to head back to the parking lot because he is also now worried about his daughter, and he feels this overwhelming need to put eyes on her. He's really conflicted and wondering how he ended up here, where his children went off with a group of 11 adults and somehow one still ends up missing. About 10 to 15 minutes later, a vehicle pulls up to him, driven by Janet, who originally had both Josie and Jaryd with her. In all of the confusion, Janet had been really panicked about losing Jaryd, and so she took Josie back to the resort, where she learned that she had crossed paths with Allyn, who had already been on his way to the trail. She dropped Josie off and then returned to the trail to talk to Allyn. Just after this, search and rescue arrives, and they start combing the trail, the woods, the mountains. They are looking for any sign of Jaryd. They were really calm through this process, and everyone felt confident that they would be able to find him. One member even told Allyn so, saying that if he's up there, they were going to find him. That night, the temperature dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and there were people searching for Jaryd all night long. The team who was out there as the sun rose were given information about Jaryd, his size. He's 3, his personality traits, and that he seems to just always wake up with the dawn. And it's not easy. It's not fun. But it's the best chance these search and rescue groups have at finding Jaryd. Allyn has so much hope in his heart for the search and rescue to find Jaryd that he didn't let worry take hold the first night as they found no sign of Jaryd. Allyn took a moment to look around at everyone who was responding. There were 200 people searching the woods, helicopters being called in, search dogs, dive teams. Word was spreading around the world about the little boy who vanished. Many more volunteers were offering their services, tracking dogs, and even some experts showed up to the trail only to be turned away by authorities. Later, Allyn would question the reasons. Having too many people in one area does get cumbersome, and it can cause problems with tracking or trampling leads. In addition to this, news stations were showing up and people were just blowing by the rules, and what started out as a really organized search became disorderly fast, which only complicates the process. But there were situations that were not handled well. Like on the second day of searching, Allyn kept his radio on and tuned into the channel that search and rescue was using. And when his mother, aunt, and sister-in-law arrived at the trail insisting that they help look, one of the deputies said over the radio, quote, "Listen, the Atadero family is causing problems, and if they don't stop causing problems, we're going to have to arrest them." Which, for the deputies, this was probably a hard spot to be in. All they know is that there's this group of several adults that brought a 3-year-old on the trail who is now missing, and they couldn't find any sign of him. As always, foul play, even from a family member, cannot be ruled out. And while this is a very hard thing to accept for parents and family members who just love this child so ferociously and are desperate to find him, sitting back and letting them do their jobs is not an easy task either. On the second day of searching, a helicopter that was being used to search for Jaryd was sent out, and as they approached Jaryd's last known location, they crashed, resulting in just another complicated layer to what was already showing to be a difficult search. The pilot of the helicopter noticed as they were trying to get a closer look at the area that they were too low, and when he said they needed to get higher altitude, the co-pilot simply said, "I know, but I can't." Mark Sheets, who was on the helicopter, watched as the blades clipped off the tops of trees, sending debris flying. One of the branches was tossed so hard inside the helicopter that when it collided with the Air Force doctor who was on board, it broke his eye socket. The helicopter ended up crashing into the actual trail, and there was a pretty big concern that the helicopter could explode because the engine was still running and the fuel was slowly leaking out. Mark was unconscious when search and rescue got to the helicopter and then pulled him to safety. Mark had clearly broken his leg based on the bone that was sticking out, and he later found out that he had broken his back and his shoulder as well, but everyone in the crash survived. It was on the 8th of October, a full week after Jaryd went missing, that the search was called off. This is a heartbreaking decision for everyone involved. There just was nothing being found, except for a couple of scent dogs indicating that they found something. Nothing was actually found. No clothes, no footprints, no blood, no broken twigs. And the unfortunate reality is that even missing children cannot be looked for forever. There are other needs of the search and rescue personnel in the woods. For 3.5 years, the Atadero family wondered what happened to Jaryd. He was so close to his 4th birthday. He was smart and funny, and he had this huge personality, and he just vanished. During the search, what Allyn was originally told took root. That Jaryd was okay, they just couldn't find him. But as time ran on, this becomes a less and less likely scenario. Allyn was feeling less informed and out of the loop as the days turned into weeks, then weeks into months, and months into years. Theories popped up saying that Jaryd must have fallen into the river and drowned. He was told that a mountain lion took him, or maybe he froze, or maybe somebody stole him. All of these things, though, are something that a parent doesn't want to believe their child suffered through. For 3.5 years, the Atadero family had no explanations, no answers, only questions that lingered in the mist on the cold mornings. It shrouded out the sun and the light, and then, almost 4 years later, clothing was found. On June 6, 2003, Allyn received a phone call from the sheriff saying that Rob Osborne and Gary Watts were out hiking on the Big South Trail. They had never been on this trail before, even being from the area. And as they were going, they noticed rocks were really loose and there was vegetation in the way. And so they're looking down at their feet as they walk, kind of making sure that where they were stepping was a good place and planning what their next step will be. They spontaneously decided to go off of the trail. They had been talking about Jaryd and how this little boy had gone missing in the exact same area that they were in now. And as they stepped farther away from the trail, Rob suddenly sees a shoe, a white, small tennis shoe. It's tucked away in some rocks, but it is clearly a shoe. They leave everything untouched and they leave to call the sheriff. Later, a jacket and pants and the other shoe would be located, all of which matched what Jaryd had been wearing the day that he went missing. When Allyn received the email with the photos of the clothing that was found near the trail that Jaryd had gone missing on, he was stunned. Without a doubt, the clothing belonged to Jaryd. It was his jacket, his pants, his shoes, and suddenly, without warning, at least one question was answered. Jaryd was never coming home, and Allyn broke down. It isn't until he sends the photos to his family members that he realizes, because his father points it out to him, that Jaryd's pants are completely inside out, almost as if they were pulled off of him. Besides this, there was no blood on the clothing, no hairs, nothing to indicate an attack or the potential of a brush with wildlife. And shockingly, besides the pants looking torn up, the jacket and the shoes specifically looked in really good condition for being in the wild for 3.5, almost 4 years. A week later, Allyn and 10 others decide to go do their own search of the trail. They don't know if they will find anything with almost 4 years having passed, but something isn't sitting well with him. The search was organized and Allyn got permission from the sheriff's office along with the specific location where the clothes were found. But just as they were starting out, a different deputy arrived and essentially told them that they couldn't go. In the end, though, this time, luck was on their side as the deputy who gave them permission was able to vouch for them. Again, setting out on the trail, Allyn is shocked at how hard the trail was to climb. There are sections where Allyn is having to brace his hands on the ground to climb forward, and then finally, they arrive at the location. It is here, while they are standing on the trail, that the 2 search and rescue members in the group point straight up the mountain for Allyn and say that it is 550 vertical feet to where Jaryd's clothing was found. This climb was very steep at a nearly 45-degree angle. And as one looks up and takes in the area, they can see how steep it is, how intense the area is, and the climb sinks in. Allyn just can't fathom how a 3-year-old climbed all the way up there by himself. When they finally arrived at the location that Jaryd's clothing was found in, they noticed that there was blue fabric scattered everywhere. But the search and rescue personnel were able to explain that the pants that Jaryd had been wearing, which were a sweatpant-style material, that rodents and birds are essentially shredding it to use for their nest. As the others start to search, Allyn just wants to get off the mountain. He wanted to see where his boy might have died, and now that he was here, he had this overwhelming desire to leave. But just as he begins to go back down, he hears the radio crack that a tooth was found not far away. Along with the tooth was the very top of a skull, or the cranium, and this is all that has ever been found of Jaryd Atadero. Unfortunately, during the original search for Jaryd in 1999, dogs would indicate that there was something up the slopes, but teams never made it to that elevation that the cranium and the tooth were found at. The helicopter that crashed was scheduled to search this area instead. The clothing, the tooth, and the cranium were all sent away for DNA confirmation that they belonged to Jaryd. Remember, this is the early 2000s, so DNA is still, and likely still is, a developing technology. The lab came back saying that they were 86% sure that the cranium belonged to Jaryd. Interestingly, the tooth came back as contaminated. There was a second set of DNA found on the tooth, and they didn't really have an explanation for this. And while many experts generally agree that Jaryd did not die from a mountain lion or a bear attack, one person came forward and mentioned that the scrapes on the cranium matched what would have occurred to Jaryd if he had been in the river and scraping against rocks as he went. But with his location, that just doesn't make any sense either. Foul play was considered, and all of the adults that were there, the fishermen, everyone who came off the trail, they were all investigated, and not a single person raised a red flag that someone could have done this to Jaryd. There are still so many unanswered questions that Allyn may never have answer to, and what ifs echo through his life. 3 years is nowhere near long enough for a boy to live. As the mother of a boy, 3 is the age where curiosity swells, and you as a parent or caregiver get to feed into that. There are so many opportunities to see those big, bright eyes light up in wonder, to help them gain confidence, to be brave in the dark. And it is clear by Jaryd's eagerness to keep up with the adults as well as wander alone that both his father Allyn and mother Angie fed into his growth. The unknowns will forever linger in these events that played out on that fateful day in October of 1999, and they are only amplified when signs of him were found in 2003. Time does not heal all wounds. Wounds are like canyons, deep and striking, and when they are just formed, the edges are rough and sharp. You cannot pass over the edges without cutting yourself. But as time passes, those edges become worn down. This does not lessen the wound, the canyon, but it sure makes it easier to slide into its depths. Thank you for listening. Again, take a moment to leave a review, follow along on social media or YouTube, share this episode with your friend, check out our Patreon. We will talk next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.